You know, I like that story because um, Detroit, like Dayton, is a very divided city with a white side and a black side. Dayton now has an immigrant side that also, and I don't know about Detroit, um, that also makes up a distinct element of the city's population. And the experiences, life experiences, the church experiences are very, very different.
The False White Gospel by Jim Wallis, Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming True Faith, and Refounding Democracy. We're going back into the introduction today. Our goal is to tweak the interest of some people who would like to discuss this book in an upcoming book discussion series this fall. If you're interested, please write to us at the email below the video. Dr. Vanya Lewis Thornton is our reader today.
I'm reading again from the introduction, the section that starts the pilgrimage to the inner city. My first conversation came when a revival preacher spoke at our church on Sunday night and pointed his finger right at me. It felt like all the other unsaved kids who were made to sit in the front row for a special service. With fire and brimstone, he proclaimed, "If Jesus came back tonight, your mommy and daddy would be taken to heaven and you would be left all by yourself." That got my attention. I was getting up in years, 6, and realized that if what the preacher said were to happen, I would have a 5-year-old sister to support. My caring mother reassured me Christianity was not about the wrath of God, but that God loved me and wanted me to be his child too. That sounded much better, so I signed up. My second conversion, and the one which had stayed with me and continues to change my life as conversations are supposed to do, came when I was a teenager. I was born and raised in Detroit, the Motor City, Motown. When I was about 16, I began to listen to my city, hear the news, read the paper, then some books, and I started to have serious conversations with adults. Some big questions emerged and began to feel like something very big was very wrong in my city and my country and my church. But I found that people in my white neighborhood, white school, and white churches didn't want to talk about it. I remember the question I asked. Life in white Detroit seems very different from life in black Detroit. Why is that? I hear about people and families who are poor and even hungry in our city who don't have enough jobs or good ones, who live in bad housing and in rough and dangerous places, and many who have family members in jail. I don't know anybody who struggles with these awful things. So, how come others do in just a few short miles from where I live? I hear there are black churches. How come we have never been told about them? Why haven't we visited them or been visited by them? The answers from my white churches and world were, "You're too young to ask those questions. When you get older, you will understand." We don't know why things are that way either. but they've always been that way. The most honest answer I received was, if you keep asking these kinds of questions, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. That was the only answer that later proved to be true. I realized that I wasn't going to get any real answers to those questions in the world where I lived. So I decided to travel outside my world to make a personal pilgrimage into another world to find the answers. Now I tell my students to trust their questions and follow them to wherever they lead. Then I took my naive white boy question into what we called the inner city to try and find out why Black Detroit seemed so different from white Detroit and why we were so separated, even and especially in our churches. I needed money for college, so I looked for jobs that would place me alongside young Black men in the city of Detroit who might have some answers. In those new jobs, I began to listen to their life stories that were very different from mine, stories that would ultimately change my story. I also went to Black churches, just showed up, and was immediately welcomed in with patience and generous answers to my many obvious questions. What they said sounded like I thought Christianity was supposed to be. But I began to realize it was very different to be a Black church than a white church in Detroit and America. Perhaps the greatest epiphany came when Butch, a new friend, who was a fellow janitor and elevator operator, yes, I was that old, took me home for dinner one night to meet his family. We discussed the local police, whose treatment of Black people was sparking many confrontations in our city of Detroit. I tell my children, Butch's mother told me, if you were lost and can't find your way home, and you see a white policeman, duck under a stairwell and hide behind a building and wait till he passes before you find your way home on your own. Very different story. I know I was deeply struck by the advice from a mother who wasn't any kind of political militant, but was completely focused on raising and protecting her kids, just like my mother. And at that moment, my own mom's words to her 5 children just screamed into my head. She told all of us, if you are ever lost and can't find your way home, look for a policeman. Policemen are your friends. They will take you by the hand and bring you home safely. Loving mothers who gave completely different advice to their children. If you were white or Black, 2 mothers, 2 cities, 2 worlds. Butch and I were born in the same city, but we lived in different countries, and so did our families. The more I listened across color lines, the more I learned how the different standards applied to everything else too. Across the color line, I found a different world, still waiting to be fully, freely, safely included in America. Wow. I like that story because um, Detroit, like Dayton, is a very divided city with a white side and a black side. Dayton now has an immigrant side that also, and I don't know about Detroit, um, that also makes up a distinct element of the city's population. And the experiences, life experiences, the church experiences are very, very different.
The theological perspective in the Black church is what drew me to the Black church. And I think that's one reason why Jim Wallis's work resonates so much with me, that we come to the Black church as people wrapped in white skin to find a liberation gospel that aligns with the Jesus Christ that we read in the Bible.
Wow. That's powerfully said. And Payne Theological Seminary trained. I know you can take that off.
No, I don't want to take it off. I'm so thankful for Payne Theological Seminary. The Afrocentric perspective, and also having the opportunity, since you mentioned immigrant populations, opportunity to read perspectives from across the world, from different groups of people who have experienced oppression and marginalization across time, to see how Christianity becomes the living gospel in the lives of people, in a way that looks different from white supremacy.
Yes. Yes. It's interesting to me that Jesus says that, or the Bible says, and Jesus doesn't say this, the Bible says this because it's in the New Testament, that we were created in his image. And that tells me blacks and whites and Hispanics and Asians were Native Americans. I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of different groups of people, but that each was created in the image of God, and a white Christian perspective doesn't embrace that. An exclusive white privilege. I mean, a white Christian perspective.
Yes, nationalism, it is different. And you make me think of the witness from first emergence of human consciousness in the Genesis accounts of creation, all the way through the book of Revelation, where it speaks of people of all nations gathering around the throne. So we really are speaking of an inclusive gospel that is for people of all nations, and that's biblically grounded.